Hello, my name is Zach Kazan, and I'm an editor at Worn & Wound, and I'm here at day 2 of Windup Watch Fair in New York City, here at the Altman Building, and today I'm really happy to be joined by Carl Rosen. Carl is the brand historian for the Bulova watch brand. Carl, thank you so much for being here today and coming to the show.
Great to be here. It's a pretty cool venue.
Yeah, the venue is fantastic. There's a lot to see here.
It dates back to 1896, and at the time, Bulova had already been in existence for 20 years in Lower Manhattan. So it's sort of interesting to feel what the vibe would have been back in the 1800s.
There's definitely kind of an old New York feel to this space for sure. You're the brand historian for Bulova, have a deeper history with Bulova beyond just that job title. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you kind of came to do what you're doing now?
Sure, and it's sort of been a great journey. I was with the company for 30 years. I retired in 2010 after 30 years as I was Chief Operating Officer and President of the Swiss subsidiary Bulova Swiss SA. So I had a lot of different varied experiences across a lot of different disciplines. And after I retired, it was 6 years when I got the call from Jeffrey Cohen, the president at the time, and he said, look, we really like to record the history. We didn't have anything codified. We didn't have an archive. And so I agreed to come back as a brand historian, and we started from zero. But first we had to determine why we wanted an archive. And we came up with this: we wanted to honor the past, celebrate the present, but also to inspire the future.
Sure.
And what's been great and very satisfying is we've been able to look back at the archive, look back at what Bulova had done, and take that DNA and create new products inspired by the old design.
Yeah. So Bulova is a brand I think of it as a New York brand, kind of quintessentially New York with a really strong heritage. What specifically about that heritage are you pulling from for these newer products, and what's important to you about sharing a Bulova?
Well, one thing we do is we take a look at what the important items were, but we talk to the collector community.
Yep.
We get feedback from them as to what they feel would be the best items to recreate. So, for instance, this item here is the Devil Diver.
Yep.
From 1970, and what I think is pretty cool is the Devil Diver name did not come from Bulova. It came from the collector community. Mm-hmm. Why? Because it was water resistant to 666 feet. So it turns out a lot of people wouldn't buy the watch because it had 666, a sign of the devil, on the dial. So ultimately, Bulova changed it to 200 meters.
Yeah.
But this is an iconic design, very innovative at the time, water resistant to 200 meters. So we came back with this collection a couple of years ago as the Devil Diver, and we created not only in the size and the color, but we then expanded it to other colors, and it's been extremely popular.
Yeah. Another part of Bulova's history that I know is really important is the military heritage of the brand. Can you talk a little bit about that and,
Sure.
and the watches that are
Sure.
part of that history?
Well, part of the military, dates back really to World War I, but in the 1950s, General Omar Bradley, who was the last 5-star general of the United States, became the chairman of the board of Bulova Research and Development.
Yep.
And there was a lot of military activity going on there. Bulova was one of the premier suppliers to the military, not only in timepieces and timing devices, but in seismometers and altimeters and missile guidance systems. And what a lot of people don't know is they know the building by LaGuardia Airport, that big Bulova corporate center, but that was designed in 1953 as a military plant.
Oh, interesting.
Not for watches. It later became the headquarters, and for Accutron, there were like 2,000 employees manufacturing Accutron there.
Yeah.
But the A11, which is a spec by the U.S. government, the hack watch, which Bulova produced, is said to have been the watch that won the war. Mm-hmm. By having that hacking mechanism, people could synchronize and really time the different activities that they were doing.
It's such a simple thing that we kind of take for granted in watches today. It's basically a function of almost any mechanical movement, with a handful of exceptions, obviously. But it's interesting that how Bulova kind of pioneered that, and how it was really based around a specific function at the time.
Yeah, but also besides the military, Bulova did a lot with NASA, and actually they had timing devices that went up in space before NASA was even created in 1958.
Yeah.
They participated in 46 different space missions, and all kinds of devices, not just watches and clocks, but without Bulova, they would not have been able to be successful even on the moon.
We have some other watches here that I know you wanted to, to talk about, and this one has a space connection, I think.
Yeah,
right?
This one is the Lunar Pilot, which was designed and was actually not the watch chosen for the official watch to go to the moon, but the commander did take his own personal one, and it turns out that it really saved him because it did go on 3 different excursions. But one thing I thought was pretty cool is the way this is designed. You can see the pushers, and it almost looks like maybe the Cadillac fins at the time from a design standpoint, but it was easy to push them when you wore a glove. So a regular pusher might have been hard, so a lot went into the design of this watch. And as a recreation in the Archive series, this has been tremendously successful and popular with today's consumers.
It's that's a really cool piece, and I feel like that's really a strength of Bulova is the storytelling aspect behind that watch and others. You really when you wear a piece like that and when you learn about it, it kind of like informs your understanding of the period it was.
Actually, this is a watch I wear practically every day. It's my go-to watch, and I feel like I'm wearing a piece of history on my wrist.
It's great.
When every time I put it on, it brings me back to what happened in 1971.
Yeah, you mentioned a moment ago the Accutron brand, so I wanted to ask you about how Bulova and Accutron are connected. It's a question that comes up a lot. Can you explain that?
Sure. Well, Accutron was the first revolution in timekeeping in 300 years when it came out. It was launched actually in a couple of days will be the anniversary, October 25th, 1960. Mm-hmm. It was based upon a tuning fork mechanism that was designed in the late 50s, and it really changed timekeeping. And some of the ads that you see for Accutron, it was like, why wear? You want to wear an Accutron instead of a watch. It was so different at the time. The one thing a lot of people don't know is the Space View was not an intentional design by Bulova. Iconically, it was an open-face dial. Actually, I'm wearing one of them now, an old one from the 60s. What Bulova did was they created some prototypes to show retailers as to how the mechanism worked with a vibrating tuning fork. And it was the retailers that said, geez, this looks great. Why can't you do that for the consumer as well? So what was created was what's called the Space View. So it became iconic.
Yeah,
and actually,
very cool.
When Bulova reintroduced the Space View in 2020, we look back, we have new technology in electrostatic movement, but we try to take certain elements to give back to that DNA, that origin of the brand, and even the PMS color for the green that you see in the open face here is what's being used in the electrostatic movement today.
That green color specifically is so iconic to that watch. It's like you can identify it from across a room almost.
Right.
And it really
but it was supposed to be hidden by a dial.
So that's like a really fascinating kind of like nugget of history.
Right. But also the Accutron was not only accurate in terms of the F-15 planes, like sort of the stealth Black Hawk planes. It was resistant to changes in temperature.
Yep.
So all of the pilots were issued Accutron watches to wear because they could withstand the temperatures that would go up to 140 degrees Fahrenheit in the cockpit.
So Bulova has obviously this enormous history. How long has the brand existed? It's
1875.
Okay, so we're talking well over 100 years, obviously.
But Joseph Bulova started as a jeweler.
Right.
He didn't do watches until like the 1912 kind of era. But I always feel that when you look back at the watches, especially in Art Deco, you can tell that he started as a jeweler. That especially for women, there were a lot of details that were put in that go back to his origin as a jeweler.
Yeah.
One that we just launched is called the American Girl. This one was actually on the show The Queen's Gambit, and they wanted to make sure that they had a vintage piece from the time, so they took one of the American Girls, and we've recreated it so the consumers today can have a piece of that history on their wrist as well. The one thing I want to talk about is packaging. Bulova was not only innovative in watches, but in marketing, in packaging.
And got some great ads behind you.
Really. And I always say that you could tell the history of America by just looking at the Bulova packaging throughout the years. Yeah. And the advertising. There's one advertisement here I saw right here. This is called the Golden Clipper. It was a watch so magnificent it deserves to be knighted. So in 1970, Bulova came out with a watch. They went to the Queen's swordsmith Wilkinson Sword and had 100 swords made that say Bulova Golden Clipper on the blade.
Very cool.
And so in the archives, we actually have one of the original watches in the original packaging and an original ad from that time period.
That's very cool.
And I have 3 of the 100 swords which were given out to
that's
consumers.
Awesome. That's awesome. We're almost out of time, Carl, but I just wanted to ask if there's anything else that our viewers and readers should be aware of. What do you want them to take away from this regarding Bulova? What should they really know?
Well, I'd say it's almost 150 years of a legacy, and it continues, and what we try to do is build in that DNA into every watch. And even in the Accutron, we have a legacy series where we've recreated some of the older timepieces. This is one that was inspired by a Canadian railroad watch that was done in the 1960s, and because of the accuracy, Bulova was granted the ability to produce watches, wrist watches, for the railroads. Before that, it was only pocket watches. Yeah. And what I think is pretty cool about this, and consumers have loved it too, is instead of having a 12, it's a 0 at the 12 o'clock marker. So it's I think pretty cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of history there for sure. Well, thank you so much, Carl, for joining us today. If viewers want to see more of the Bulova collection, I assume they can just go to the website and check out the watches.
Yeah, there should be a museum section on there. We've try to make it available to people.
Yep.
People are thirsty for the history. There are websites out there with 20,000 Bulova collectors dedicated. MyBulova.com is dedicated just to the history of the Bulova brand, and Bulova had nothing to do with it. It was the passion of the collectors that created this community.
That's great. Again, thank you so much for sharing a little bit of Bulova's history with us, Carl, and we appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
Great.
Thank you.
Great to be with you.